I'm honored and delighted to introduce to you today the very Reverend Archimandrite Nathanael Symeonides, who heads the Archdiocese Department of Inter-Orthodox Ecumenical Interfaith Relations. He's assembled an incredible panel today to talk about the good work that his department done, and I welcome each of them and thank them very much. Father?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Your Eminence, Archbishop Dimitrios, our beloved Father, Your Eminences, dear Fathers, Mr. George Sandikos, our Chairman of Leadership 100, Ms. Paulette Poulos, the Executive Director of Leadership 100, dear colleagues on the panel and co-panelists, brothers and sisters in Christ. Why does the Archdiocese have an ecumenical office, and why in the world are we dedicating our resources to it? These two questions were posed by a member of the Church during an open plenary session at the 2014 Clergy Lady Congress. I never expected to hear such questions, at least not so soon after being assigned director of the department earlier that year. Like it or not, however, these were real questions, questions that needed answers, questions that have drawn my attention numerous times during the last 4 years. These questions have in part informed our department's work and have shed light on two very important facts. First, that our people don't really know much about our department. They don't know who we are. And second, they don't know what we do. And if people don't know what we do and who we are, then how can we expect them to support us? To answer these questions, we've needed to first identify our mission, and then slowly identify the means by which we could fulfill this mission. Our department's mission is directly connected to Christ's mandate to his disciples. That is, to share the good news, to share the gospel with all creation. This means that our mission is universal, not parochial. It requires dialogue, not withdrawal and retreat. It demands an open mind, not fundamentalism. It presumes cooperation, not self-absorption. When taken seriously, our mission, like that of the disciples, can actually help transform the world. And as we attempt to transform the world, we recognize a need to be fully engaged in the world, to be fully engaged by the world, and to conduct ourselves in a manner that highlights a church that is not of the world. I'm really grateful that I've been given the opportunity to introduce you to our department and to show you a glimpse of how we actually attempt to transform the world. As its name suggests, the department is expected to manage archdiocesan work related to inter-Orthodox, ecumenical, and interfaith engagement. It's also tasked with representing the Archdiocese in important civic discourses, especially at the United Nations and in Washington, D.C. Our mandate is quite broad. Perhaps it's unrealistic at times, but we embrace the challenge and strategically seek ways to work more efficiently and effectively. We achieve this by embracing an ethos of cooperation and inclusion. In an interview on the Fox Business Channel during this year's World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Andrew Liveris commented on the essence of an America First economic policy. We don't put America first, he said, and I'm only paraphrasing, we don't put America first if we don't have an America that's engaged. Similarly, while it's natural for us to emphasize orthodoxy first, that is, to focus primarily on our own communities, on our own children, on our own families, and on our own issues, the only real way to place orthodoxy first is to ensure that orthodoxy is engaged in and by the world. There's a well-known proverb that teaches us the value of cooperation. It reads, "As iron sharpens iron, so too one person sharpens another." As a department, we yearn to work with others so that we may sharpen them, but we also lend a hand so that others may sharpen us. And in so doing, we accept that there are others that are far smarter and far better at their work than us. We reject that engagement with others is a zero-sum game. And we do this because we believe transforming the world doesn't mean that we must always outperform the world. Such cooperation has allowed our department to develop a network comprised of hundreds of men and women, ordained and lay, religious and secular, Christians and non-Christians, who graciously answer our invitation time and time again to work with us, and who in turn ask us to take part in their important work as well. Most importantly, our open door policy and ethos has rendered our department an incubator of ideas and future talent. I'm very, very proud that over the past 4 years, we've introduced 6 high school and college interns to our work, and have cultivated 4 graduate school fellows. This shouldn't sound groundbreaking at all to us, since it's the exact thing that Christ did. And yet, for 2,000 years, Christ has often remained an enigma. For generations, people have yearned to imitate Christ and to do his work. And though they may engage in personal acts of charity resembling Christ's example, they often forget to imitate his inclusive spirit. Of course, we know that Jesus had a personal and direct impact on the lives of people. But we also know that he comforted the masses using the hands of his followers. Jesus found 12 very broken disciples. He healed them. He trained them. He imbued them with the Holy Spirit, blessing them with the spiritual fortitude to continue his transformative work. And as these disciples preached the gospel to their immediate communities, they eventually became apostles who inspired others and commissioned them to cast their nets even wider than previous generations. With the help of Leadership 100, our department attempts to cast its nets wider and wider through an ethos of inclusion and cooperation. I'm exceedingly grateful to the countless women and men who assist us in our mission to transform the world. Without them, it's very easy for us to become complacent and content with the achievements of the past, perhaps even become navel-gazers who focus all their attention on ourselves at the expense of a wider view of the world. When George and Paulette first asked me to present at this year's Leadership 100 conference, I told them I would do so under 2 specific conditions. First, His Eminence needed to approve. I needed his blessing. And second, I needed to be joined by others on this stage. And as we continued our conversation over lunch, they understood that this was only right, that it would be wrong if I alone spoke about the department. And this is because our department's achievements are essentially more than the results of my efforts. Everything we have achieved derives from our collaboration with others. Collaboration between our departments at our archdiocese, and collaboration between our department and individuals and institutions beyond the walls of our archdiocese. And so while I'm glad that I've been able to offer you a brief introduction to our Archdiocese, I'm really thrilled that you'll be able to hear from some of the people with whom we collaborate. Hopefully, they, more than I, will help you understand who we are and why what we do matters. Allow me to announce them by name. You can read a little bit more about them in your program. Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost, Christina Hureas, Esquire, Joyce Dubansky, Esquire, and Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou. We've also added Nicholas Anton, who I must say makes me very proud. Nicholas works for our department. He and I are the only full-time staff of our department, and you ought to know this. He and I are tasked to do all of this, and if it wasn't for our partners and friends, collaborators and supporters, we would not be able. And so, Nicholas, I thank you for all you do. I look to you as the future of the department, and I thank you again. When thinking about who would join me today, I did my best to put together a panel that could best showcase the diversity and broad reach of our department. As I looked at the final list of names, I was pleased that I would share the podium with 4 incredibly gifted, strong, dedicated, and charitable professionals, each recognized globally for their achievements. I was also pleasantly surprised that they all happen to be women. And you can clap that they're women. You can clap some more. I think you'll agree with me that as a community, we need to do more by way of acknowledging the gifts and talents of women. If I may say, one way to begin this process, or to continue the process, is for Leadership 100 to recruit many, many more women, and include them in its key leadership roles. They are our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters. They are an important part, 50% of our community, of the world's population. They have a lot to offer, and we have so much to learn from them. And so without further ado, it's a great joy to turn the podium over to my 4 incredible colleagues. Thank you very much.
Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, Presbyteras, sisters and brothers in Christ here at Leadership 100, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I am Carrie Frederick Frost. I am an Orthodox theologian and a professor, and I am the editor of a volume of essays that Father Nathanael's office is publishing. It's called The Reception of the Holy and Great Council, Reflections of Orthodox Christian Women, and it will be published later this year. This is a truly exceptional and unique project. This is the only volume of its kind. Indeed, this is the only time in the course of the history of the Church that women's voices have been sought and gathered together to contribute to any council. This volume has an origin story. During Great Lent of 2016, 4 colleagues and I wrote a simple article that expressed the hope that the delegations of the Holy and Great Council that was due to take place later that year might include women. Our thinking was that here in the 21st century, Orthodox women have so much to offer the Church. Why not access our expertise as theologians, lawyers, historians, diplomats, etc., as lay consultants at the Council? This article was passed around the world in several languages, and its enthusiastic response affirmed that there was global interest in the inclusion of women in the Holy and Great Council. The rules of order of the council allowed for laity to be appointed as special consultants to each delegation. And ultimately, 4 women were included as special consultants, and several other women were present as interpreters and press team members. One of the 4 women that served as a special consultant is here by my side, Dr. Elizabeth Prodromou, who we'll hear from in a minute. And she, along with another woman, was included in the delegation of His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. She also wrote the afterword for this volume that I'm speaking about. 2 other women accompanied His Beatitude Anastasios, Archbishop of Albania. Now, while it is wonderful that any women at all were present at the council and that these particular women were present at the council, and this was something that was not clear to happen until nearly the last minute, let's be clear. The 4 special consultant women were just a drop in an ocean of hundreds of bearded and black-robed hierarchs. Because of their role as special consultants, they had very limited ability to participate in the process. And this speaks to the limited role of the laity at this council, not just the role of women. The women were ultimately able to contribute to a sentence in the council's message, but overall, one may say that their role was more of observers than consultants. And truly, an opportunity was lost. It would have been quite possible, for example, as the structure of the council was being established, to have created delegations of women from each of the autocephalous churches. Sadly, the limited role that was allotted to women during the council is reflective of the larger situation of women in the Orthodox Church. And I do want to underscore just how exceptional and rare and wonderful it is to see 4 women on a panel such as this. And yet, even given this very limited role, as I watched the council unfold, I was aware that when the council itself concluded, it was not, in some sense, complete. In order for the Holy and Great Council of 2016 to be understood as influential, church tradition holds that it must be accepted, it must be received by the faithful of the church, half of whom are women. And so I saw an opportunity for women to be involved in the council by receiving it, by writing about it. I began soliciting essays from women about the council, essays on roles of women in the church, as well as all sorts of other theological, ethical, doctrinal, and pragmatic matters related to this council as well as future councils. It was at this point that Father Nathanael and I came into touch, and we agreed to pursue the project together. This project fit well with the aims of his office. It is truly inter-Orthodox, with contributors coming from various jurisdictions within the U.S. Greek Orthodox, Orthodox Church in America, the Antiochian Church, the Ukrainian Church, and my home church, the Carpatho-Russian Church, as well as many Orthodox churches outside of the U.S., including Serbia, Greece, Russia, France, and Britain. Another hallmark of Father Nathanael's office is its dedication to connecting the church's scholars, academics, and other experts with the faithful and the hierarchy of the church. These essays are purposefully written in a non-academic, accessible style so that any interested member of the faithful can pick them up and read them. And here I would like to expressly thank Leadership 100 for the support of the publication of the first 3 volumes that have preceded this one in the Faith Matters series on the Council published by Father Nathanael's office, which have also been valuable inter-Orthodox scholarly reflections on the Council made accessible to a broad readership. And there are some for offer on the table in the back. I also want to thank Leadership 100 for your consideration of assisting with the printing and distribution of this volume, The Reception of the Holy and Great Council, Reflections of Orthodox Christian Women, as part of this year's grant submission by Father Nathanael's department. We see this volume as playing a meaningful role in the reception of the council for women and for men, for monastics, for clergy, for laity alike. It includes a wonderful array of essays on everything from the reception of other Christians into the church to bioethics, on the rules of fasting as applied today to the reinstitution of the female diaconate. The Orthodox Church is defined by the continuity of her living tradition. This volume, The Reception of the Holy and Great Council, Reflections of Orthodox Women, preserves and enlivens our living tradition by creating a space for women's voices on the Holy and Great Council to be offered and to be heard. I extend my deep gratitude to Father Nathanael and his office for quite literally creating such a space by publishing this volume. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank His Eminence Archbishop Dimitrios, Paulette Poulos, George Stanzikos, and Father Nathanael for the very kind introduction and for welcoming me here today. For my remarks, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do and how this overlaps with Father Nathanael and Nicholas's work. I'll then talk about some of the initiatives that they've taken and how they've been very influential in foreign affairs and at the United Nations, and then possibilities for the future. So, who I am and what I do. I'm a lawyer and I practice what's called public international law. It's the resolution of political disputes between countries, or disputes between investors and companies and countries, or between individuals and countries. So what does that look like? That can be trade disputes, it can be human rights issues, and it could be water and resource issues. Think about boundary disputes. Two countries discover oil and gas on their boundary. Historically, they may have, and many have, gone to war over that. But now we have treaties in place that allow countries to take their complaints to the World Court in The Hague to resolve those disputes amicably. So that's the type of work that I do. And hand in hand with that is representing countries before the UN in these negotiations, in negotiating treaties or trying to resolve their disputes amicably. So it's in that context that I have worked most closely with Father Nathanael and with Nicholas. So how does this work overlap with their work? To give you that answer, first I'll tell you a little bit about what is international law. So international law governs the relationship between countries, so it's how countries treat each other. And a lot of that is treaty-based, so you can think of a treaty like a contract between two countries where they pledge to behave a certain way towards each other. They're going to, for example, cooperate on trade. And along with those treaties is also international law that is created through decisions of the World Court and through discussions that take place at the UN. So of course, when states are present at the UN and negotiating, they're going to act primarily in self-interest. That makes sense, right? Because they have limited resources. So when Cyprus goes to the UN, Cyprus is fairly focused on the Cyprus issue. When the Republic of Korea is at the UN, they're primarily focused on nuclear non-proliferation. When the Marshall Islands is at the UN, they are speaking about the effects of rising sea levels. So because each country is very focused on their most pressing issues, that means that a lot of other critical issues can fall through the cracks because there isn't a country that is taking the initiative to bring forward those issues. And that's where Father Nathanael and Nicholas's department comes in, because they have a special status at the UN, ECOSOC status, which allows them to initiate a dialogue on issues that they believe are of concern and are concern for Orthodox Christians, and raise them at the UN. And these could be issues that otherwise might not be discussed because other countries are preoccupied with their key issues. So what are some of those issues? Well, the trafficking of children, sex trafficking of children, access to clean water, issues of the protection of cultural property. Those are all topics that Father Nathanael and Nicholas have brought to the UN, and countries have engaged on those issues because they have raised them before that body. So what have we done on that? And I have cooperated with them because I represent different countries in those negotiations. And so I've gotten a chance to see them in practice and see the good work that they do and the relationships that they've built. So on the protection of cultural property, as many of you know, unfortunately, a lot of our churches are being or have been desecrated. Some have been converted into stables. They have been pillaged. Some have been converted into brothels. Really terrible things that have happened to our churches around the globe. Now, turning back to international law and treaties, unfortunately, the current treaties that address the protection of cultural property actually only cover pillaging of churches during times of war. So if there is a destruction of a church that doesn't occur during a time of war, there actually isn't a comprehensive treaty that covers that. But with Father Nathanael and Nicholas's help, they have initiated a dialogue to talk about, should we be thinking about more protections for cultural property and creating a possible new treaty? Cyprus is now spearheading that discussion at the UN, and it is taking off, and that is because there are individuals like Father and Nicholas who are raising those issues at the UN. What is another example? Access to clean water. Now, why is that an Orthodox issue? Because it's a human rights issue, and there are Orthodox all around the world and non-Orthodox who don't have access to clean water. And especially, we have churches in developing states in Africa, and it's important to provide support to our sister archdioceses in other countries as well. So what have they done? They initiated a dialogue at the UN, again, another issue that could otherwise slip through the cracks because states are preoccupied with their primary issues, and have brought countries to the table to talk about access to fresh water. Now, what does that mean in a more concrete sense? We have already a treaty in place. It's called the Law of the Sea Convention. Some of you might have heard it because it's the legal principles that govern the right of Cyprus to explore its natural gas together with Israel and Egypt. So those are the legal principles that govern how to divide up resources in the water, but that applies only for the sea and the ocean. So what happens with access to fresh water when it is underground, an aquifer, and it straddles two or more countries? There actually isn't a treaty on that. So one state could drill, extract a substantial amount of water, and leave another state deprived, and there actually aren't guiding principles on that topic yet. But now a dialogue has been initiated at the UN, and that's a topic that is being taken up and seriously discussed. So those are just two of the many accomplishments that have been initiated by Father and his office, and that we have collaborated on, and we're bringing countries to the table to do something on those issues. So what is the value add of this work? 2 points. One is the value add for society, of course. It's creating rules that promote international human rights and good governance between states. But what about for the church? Well, it's fulfilling the church's mission of promoting human rights, of course, and advocating for issues that are of concern for Orthodox. But let's think about it even from a more cynical perspective. If the Orthodox Church is vocal on a whole host of issues that are not the typical issues that one might expect the church to speak on, you would think we would speak on religious minority issues, on protection of cultural property, on the discrimination against Christians in Turkey. Those are some of the issues that one might expect us to raise at the UN. But now, if the Orthodox Church is talking about issues of poverty, sex trafficking, access to clean water, they're a bigger player at the UN, and that means that more states know, countries know, that they can come to Father Nathanael and Nicholas and get an exchange to ask for support on issue A, and in exchange for that, they can ask for support on our key issues of religious minority issues. So it's just more chips to cash in this kind of realistic game that is foreign affairs. So there are these aspirational, important goals that can be accomplished on the human rights level, but then also on a practical level to help our church and to help Hellenism more broadly before the UN. So this is just a little bit, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more that they can and want to do, but they have, the resources that they do have to do it. With greater resources, I believe they can be initiating dialogues on even more issues of key importance and establishing relationships with countries who will assist the Orthodox Church in exchange as well. And thank you very much for your attention.
I'm Joyce, and I am really honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Father Nathanael, but special thanks to His Eminence Archbishop Dimitrios, to your chairman, George, and to your superwoman, Paulette. It really means something to me to be here because I'm an outsider, a Jewish woman CEO leading a secular, non-sectarian organization, and one of your partners. My organization is the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding. And for those of you who are confused, we are not a foundation. I ask for money. I don't give it. We have a long history with the Greek Orthodox community. It started with our namesake, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, who worked for justice alongside the leaders of his day, including his very dear friend, Archbishop Yakovos, and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So it was natural that when Mark died and we founded Tannenbaum 25 years ago, we honored Archbishop Yakovos, and later we commemorated our ongoing partnership by honoring Archbishop Dimitrios. My charge today is to tell you a little bit about Tannenbaum and more about how we partner with Father Nathanael and the department he leads. First, Tannenbaum. We have a big mission. We focus on combating religious bigotry and discrimination, and we try to build a world where our differences and our shared humanity are respected and honored. Or if you want to say it differently, it's about living the golden rule. And here's the golden rule. It's back there for you. We have some copies. Show and tell. We do it by emphasizing how we treat each other in everyday life. So the kids aren't bullied in school. Employees are religiously accommodated in companies like PwC, Disney, and Target. And so the doctors and nurses provide religio-culturally competent care, everyday life. But we also do it through our conflict resolution and peace-building work, where we work with people who are driven by faith, driven by their religion, women and men, to try to find a way toward peace even in the world's worst armed conflicts. There are peacemakers in action, and we produce case studies on them, more show and tell. But we also work directly with them. And so we convene them, and we work with their network. They call themselves now the Peacemakers Network, where they not only stay in touch because we facilitate their communications, but in small groups, they do interventions in armed conflicts. A few points about these 32 individuals. Many of them, as you'd expect, are clergy from very diverse religious traditions, mostly men. But there are others. They are lay leaders who pursue peace because of their faith. And that means we've got a lot of women peacemakers who are on the ground in places you only read about, like Syria Afghanistan, South Sudan, the Philippines. Religious peacemaking for these individuals is a vocation, and it's one that people living the religious life need to understand. So maybe that's why, in partnering with us, the department sent 2 seminarians to our last working retreat. There, they got to meet my heroines, my heroes, and they learned from them, but they also helped us to run the program, so it was a win-win. Frankly, I cannot imagine a better way for your future leaders to learn that religious life is not only inside the building, but is in daily life, that it shows up in everyday men and women, in the real world, and even in armed conflicts. So that's one way we partner. Another is the Tannenbaum presented at the department's conference on Orthodox Christianity and humanitarianism at Holy Cross. And not only did I learn a lot there, but what was really great was that I got to meet Father Sava from Kosovo for the very first time, and he's one of our peacemakers, but I'd never met him. That led to a visit that I had with Father Sava in his monastery, of course facilitated by Father Nathanael. And that's where I saw a monastery enclosed by barbed wire, because they are still under threat. And the government is pushing under the rug a lot of the incidents that are occurring. Right after that visit, I went to Pristina, where the police chief was giving a big presentation and telling everyone how Interfaith was working in Kosovo and how everyone was safe. So I used the opportunity to be an ally, and I raised my hand. I publicly questioned him and talked about a particular instance that I had heard from Father Sava about armed men associated with ISIS who had been stopped just before they got to the monastery one night. He denied the incident. There's more. Father Nathanael also helped me to get Christina onto Tannenbaum's board. That is a very big deal. Of course, you already know she's a rock star. But besides that, Tannenbaum has to have a diverse board of directors. We actually need it, including religiously diverse, so that we can ensure that our mission and our vision of inclusion is protected, preserved, and practiced. So Christina brings to us a Greek Orthodox voice, and I want her to stay on the board, but I don't want her to be a token. So I'm excited that Father Nathanael is on our communications committee, and I would love him to be on our board as well, subject, of course, to the approval of the Archbishop. There's still more, but the clock is ticking. So let me close by noting that the Tannenbaum Archdiocese Partnership actually fulfills on the vision that you heard Father Nathanael lay out for you. First, it amplifies the voice and presence of your national church. Second, it is helping to build your leadership and ours, partnership, inclusion. And finally, it's bringing Christ's message to the world, often in very quiet ways. Like the time I had a chance to maybe, possibly, remote chance to stop the carnage, some of it, in South Sudan. It was a confidential mission, and I needed to go to people for help. There were only 3 people that I felt comfortable going to, and Father Nathanael was one of them. And what I can tell you is that we have every reason to believe that some lives were saved. Another quiet impact was actually personal for me, so I will share it. At our working retreat, one of your seminarians was a man named Paul. He was the first to clean up after every session and was there early every morning setting up for us. So he wasn't using that free time for networking for his benefit. What he was doing was helping those who were trying to run a very complicated retreat. Through his example, he showed me what true service looks like, and it's a lesson I carry to this day. So I want to thank you, all of you, for any and all of the ways that you help Father Nathanael and Nick to do the church's work. It no doubt benefits the church and the way the world sees the church. But you're benefiting others as you do this, including the Jewish woman standing in front of you right now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Your Eminence, I begin by reiterating the heartfelt wishes for a happy birthday, na ta katostesede, with health and strength for your new year. I thank also Paulette Poulos and George Tsadikos for welcoming us here. I thank all of you who are here and inviting us in to be part of the Leadership 100 family for this afternoon. Your Eminences, Metropolitan Sava and Metropolitan Nicholas, thank you as well for being with us. And thank you, Father Nathanael, my sincerest gratitude to you and to your team, Nick, for the opportunity to serve the church in yet another way through collaboration and cooperation with your office, with your department. When I learned that Father Nathanael had been appointed to lead the Department of Interfaith Ecumenical Inter-Orthodox Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations. I was very excited. I called him immediately to congratulate him. I told him that I was at his disposal to brainstorm, to strategize, to scenario build, to imagine, and to share the names of other individuals who I thought would also be helpful in the mission of his department. And all of us are sitting up here working together with him. It's been my pleasure to be a part of the exciting work of his department and to see in particular the many ways that his department translates ideas into action, faith into works, and in the process brings the church into open, dynamic, dedicated engagement with other churches, Orthodox churches, with other Christian denominations, and with other faith traditions. In other words, his department helps the church to be church. And it's been really humbling to be able to cooperate and collaborate as part of that. I want to give a little bit of background that will be useful context for understanding the organic synergies, I think, that have emerged in the projects on which I've collaborated with Father Nathanael's department. First, I'm an academic. I'm a political scientist. I work on religion and geopolitics, and most specifically on global orthodoxy. So that means orthodoxy from the United States and the Western Hemisphere, to the Balkans, to all of Europe, to the Middle East and across Eurasia, to Africa and to Australia. I'm a faculty member at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and so I teach in a school that trains leaders. And by that I mean leaders in the public sector for diplomacy and policy, leaders in the private sector for global business and international finance, in the security space, from intelligence to military service, and in the human security and nonprofit sector, including the work of faith-based organizations and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and also secular NGOs. With the support of our Dean, Admiral James Stavridis, who I'm happy to say will be here, I think, Saturday evening, we've made religion, teaching about religion and the role of religion in world affairs mainstream at the Fletcher School. And indeed, our Religion, Law, and Diplomacy initiative is currently in the first of a 2-year program on religious literacy, in which orthodoxy has figured as well. And Joyce joined us for our first conference on religious literacy in in which we had, amongst other things, a panel on the Balkans, which, given the regional footprint, addressed and was informed by Orthodoxy as well. But I deal every day in the academic space with knowledge about religion and teaching about religion to future leaders who must understand leadership in terms of active service. So I connect the world of ideas with practice and the world of education with practice. And that's been a dotted line to Father Nathaniel's office, to the department. As somebody who also served in a diplomatic position and then on 2 advisory boards to secretaries of state, I've also seen the ways in which religion, and in particular religious questions of religious freedom and human rights, require and demand the voice and the participation of the Orthodox Church alone, in combination with the Greek Orthodox Church, with other Orthodox churches, and certainly with other faith traditions, because after all, religious freedom and human rights are universal, and we believe that every individual is created in the image and likeness of Christ, and the Church needs to give voice to that and take action on that. Again, another dotted line with the department that Father Nathaniel leads. And then finally, in terms of the peace-building and NGO world, my work tends to focus overwhelmingly on how interfaith and ecumenical engagement can help people to be free from fear, to be free from want, and to be free from need. And so there's, again, another dotted line to all of the work that you've already heard about. My collaboration with Father Nathaniel's department has really centered in 3 categories. I'll say a little bit about each, and then certainly be glad to answer any questions. The first are projects with a specific problem focus. They address a set of core ideas, and they are designed to produce actions, and they are designed to produce measurable results. Second have been projects that involve advisory and consultation to generate sustainable initiatives that can actually contribute to the growth in the institutional capacity of the department, and therefore by extension the church, so that we can become a robust institution that doesn't depend on individuals, but is an entity, an ecclesial entity that involves all individuals, and as a consequence is capable of reacting dynamically and adaptively. And then third, targets of opportunity, and these include participation by department members or on behalf of the department in areas where the church is a natural stakeholder and is shares with other communities and their values and their interests. So let me give you an example in each of these categories. In terms of projects with a specific thematic focus, 2 have been especially exciting. The first Joyce mentioned was the project on Orthodox Christianity and humanitarianism. That was a day-and-a-half workshop. We held it at Hellenic College Holy Cross, and we brought Orthodox, non-Orthodox, and other Orthodox Christians to explore the rich theological resources, but also to look at the actual activities of Orthodox entities when it comes to responding to humanitarian needs in places as diverse as Joyce mentioned, Kosovo, Kenya, Palestine, Syria, and also to develop greater collaborative networks and competencies so that our church can engage and help the most vulnerable communities in the world. We published this special edition of the Review of Faith and International Affairs, which is a premier journal for policymakers who work at the interstices of religion and international relations. A second project that we've collaborated on has been on religion and migration in the Mediterranean and Europe. That was a day-and-a-half colloquium that we held at the Fletcher School this time, and we brought together policymakers and practitioners from spaces as diverse as the U.S. State Department, from NATO, from religious communities, from the Ecumenical Patriarchate to the community of Sant'Egidio, and we brought them together to talk about the causes of this massive human migration across the Mediterranean into Europe, making the Mediterranean what many human rights activists have called the most dangerous migration route in the world. And again, here again, Father Nathaniel's office helped us with networking. We introduced his office to people and policymakers engaged in looking at the question of migration, but most specifically at the ways in which religious communities, for example, Lighthouse of the World, Pharos tou Cosmo in Greece, or IOCC, or again, the community of Sant'Egidio, the Home Project, are dealing with the question of migration and what kinds of resources can they offer, what kinds of psychological, medical, and financial and labor resources can they offer to this massive wave of human beings. Those are two of the practical projects. In terms of advisory consultation, I've been happy to participate in the origination and the growth of an internship project for the United Nations presence of the department. That's been really, really exciting because it's been a way to make something from nothing, and in particular, to look at the needs of the church when it comes to our voice at the UN, which again, Christina outlined beautifully, I think, how to design an internship program, and also how, therefore, to involve young people who are desperate to participate in the life of the church and who understand service as a way to offer something back to the church, regardless of whether or not they're going into the private sector, the public sector, into diplomacy, into security. It doesn't matter, but they want to help the church. And this internship program allows them to experiment through the department with perhaps a life in public service at the UN. But again, it builds the kind of institutional capacity and the inclusiveness that makes our church a better church and makes us more capable of partnering with other faith-based communities and non-religious communities. And then in terms of targets of opportunity, again, just because time is ticking, on behalf of the department, it's been a pleasure to welcome and invite and share information with the department on a working group on Christianity and religious pluralism in the Middle East that I co-convene in Washington. It's been an honor to address the Assembly of Bishops with members of the Newseum Institute and the Religion News Service. His Eminence presided over that. And it's also been really great fun to blog on the Faith Matters blog site of the department. And this takes us back to the question of religious literacy. Writing about issues that concern the church in so many different spaces, on so many different issues, and in ways that make our faith accessible and challenge us to make the message of our faith real for those who read that blog site. So these are some of the ways in which I've been really humbled to collaborate with the department. I will offer my service, continue to offer my service in any way that is useful. And I want to thank Leadership 100 for having the vision and the energy and the commitment to support the work of the office, to support an office that builds knowledge, that builds skills, that amplifies the voice of orthodoxy, and that makes the work of the church precisely what our mission is, to help those who are most vulnerable and to transfigure the world in which we live. And God knows our world needs transfiguring. So thank you very much.
As Father Nathaniel mentioned, I was a very late addition. His Eminence had suggested at lunch that I say a few words. And not only is he my boss, but it's also his birthday, so there's no way I could say no. So thank you, Your Eminence, for this opportunity. Mr. Sandikos and Ms. Paulopoulos, thank you for having me down here. Your Eminences and beloved brothers and sisters in Christ, I have to say first and foremost, thank you to all of you, because our work at the United Nations would simply not be possible without your support. The fellowship program was mentioned a few times, and that fellowship program was able to get off the ground due to a grant from Leadership 100. So thank you so much, and know that it's never overlooked, your generosity. I'm not going to go through the things we do because many of the other panels have already touched upon them. Christina did a great job of talking about some of the main issues that we work upon, but I figure I'll just mention a little bit about why. We say, what do? I do faith-based diplomacy. You say that to people, are like, what is faith-based diplomacy? What does that even mean? Faith-based diplomacy is being church. It's being an Orthodox Christian in my case, in our case. So I'll give a few examples. When I was about a year and a half ago, I went and visited some of the refugee camps in Greece. And I went up to a family. It was a husband, a wife, and three little children. And I asked them to tell me their story. They said, I was a lawyer somewhere in Syria. I can't remember the exact city. The wife said she was a professor. And they could hear ISIS coming from a couple miles away. So they got in their car, they drove as fast as they could until the car ran out of gas. They got out of the car and they walked. They got themselves smuggled across the border into Turkey. They went all the way through Turkey and then paid more smugglers to get them into Greece. And they had been there 3 months without any asylum hearings. They said to me, the UN officials have come every month, and every month they assure us next month asylum hearers will be coming to hear your cases, and we'll see what happens. That's one case. Here in New York, I met with a young woman, we had lunch, who was a survivor of human trafficking. She told me her story about how from the time she was 6 years old, her mother would bring people home and sell them to these people for the night. And then as she grew up, she finally ran away from home, but she didn't know how to make money any other way, so she found herself a pimp and began in that life. Until finally when she tried to leave and she got beat up so bad, she was in the hospital for months. When she came conscious, she found a rehabilitation home and she was able to get better, and now she's an advocate for victims of human trafficking. If we are to take a faith-based approach and be the church, then we have to represent people in these cases. We have to see people before us. You think of Christ on the road to Emmaus, the Samaritan woman. It's not about necessarily the faith of the person in front of us. The people I talked to in Greece, they were Muslim, and the woman that I spoke to in New York at the time when she left the trafficking, she was atheist, and she's become a Protestant Christian since then. But this is why we do what we do at the UN. And as Christina said, we have the avenue. So these people in this camp, ideally we would like to get their voice directly into the UN, but we can't. So I can go. I went 2 weeks later, I was at the UN. At that time, the ambassador of Ireland and the ambassador of Jordan were heading up a process on migration refugees. And I went to them to say, look, the UN itself is promising them asylum hearings, and they're not getting them. So we were, as the church, we were able to elevate and to represent those people and to stand up for them. And the reason we did that is because we're Orthodox Christians, but we did it so that we can get into the system and get them to, from the top down, be able to implement and say, go hear their cases, and not just theirs, but everybody who's there. We need to maybe fund more programs to get more asylum hearers. So I don't want to go on further and further. I'll just mention that we do have a newsletter that we started. So if you go to our website, ecumenical.goars.org, you can sign up for it. This month we talked about water and sanitation. Last month, ending violence against women. A lot of our materials are in the back. In the folders, we actually have our statements to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. And just thank you again for all of your support and for your continued support.
A nice round of applause.